everyone. Welcome to the Preemie Chats. Preemie Chats is our weekly educational sessions for healthcare professionals and parents to talk about what matters to you, to explore new ideas, and to learn together. I'm Fabiana Bacchini. I am a Preemie parent and executive director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, as known as CPBF, and I'm happy to be your host today. CPBF is a parent-led charitable organization that helps families in and after the NICU through education, support, and advocacy. If you have a heart for preemies, whether you're a family or a healthcare professional, please check our website, canadianpreemies.org. There you'll find resources, the latest projects, and most importantly, a community of people who wants to see our little babies thrive. And if you're watching this live today, please bring your voice to this table. Leave comments and questions in the chat, and we'll try to address them during our program. It is through rich conversations like this that we can advance practice and learn together. So please participate and let us know where you're watching from. And today we're going to talk about something very important for all families of preterm baby, how to introduce solids. We'll focus on navigating the introduction of solid foods to your preterm infant. We'll discuss when and how to introduce solid foods, include the developmental milestones to look for and the first foods to serve. Dr. Walton will also touch on peak eating versus problem eating and provide practical easy to implement tips for reducing mealtime stress. And I have here joining us live from Toronto, let me bring her on stage, Dr. Kathryn Walton, who is a registered dietitian and assistant professor of applied nutrition at the University of Guelph. Dr. Walton completed her PhD at the University of Guelph and a postdoctoral fellowship at the Hospital for Sick Children. Dr. Walton's work examines the parent-child interactions related to feeding, eating, and family meal times while considering how parenting stress and family functioning might impact young children's health. Dr. Walton's current focus on supporting feeding practices and health eating among children born very preterm and those with neurocognitive impairments. She's passionate about helping parents raise happy, healthy eaters. Dr. Walton, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, and for all of you, just a quick reminder that we'll be taking your questions at the end of Dr. Walton's presentation. So please do send them on our comment session. And the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. It is such a pleasure to be here today to chat with you about introducing solids to your preterm infant. And today is particularly exciting for me. I'm just returning back to work from being on maternity leave, and my young son is also starting solids. So this is not only an area of research of mine, but it's also top of mind for me right now as a mom. So our goals for today's presentation, I have 4 main goals. So first, we're going to start talking about when to start solids. So what the timing is and what developmental milestones we're going to look for to know if our child is ready for solids. We're then going to talk really practically about how to start solids. So what first foods we're going to start with, and where children should be sitting and things like that. We'll then talk about navigating challenges. Feeding can be difficult and young children are learning. So we'll talk about, common pitfalls, but also when to seek help. And then we're going to end with some really practical tips for helping to reduce mealtime stress. And of course, I welcome all of your questions and comments at the end of the talk. So as we start today's presentation, I really want us to focus in on the fact that our babies are learning to eat. It's a new skill for them, something they haven't eaten solid foods before. So there's lots they have to learn. And as parents and caregivers, we are learning to feed. So both baby and parent is learning. And And it can take time to navigate this together. So be patient with your child and patient with yourself. If things don't go the way you think they should at first, that's okay. And we'll talk about when to seek help if you are experiencing extra stress or challenges in your journey to solid foods with your little one. So first and foremost, when to start solid foods. For our preterm babies, we're going to introduce solids around 6 months corrected age. And I say around 6 months corrected age because we're really looking for some key milestones indicating that our baby is ready for solid foods. So first and foremost, we're looking for our child to be able to sit up independently on the floor. So that's not with any in a seat or being supported. They themselves can sit up independently for a short period of time. So if you set them on the floor, they're not immediately falling over. We want our child to have good head and neck control. We want them to be able to open their mouth when food is offered and turn their head away when they're full. So again, that head and neck control. We want them to be showing interest in food. And if you're eating in front of them, are they reaching for it, smiling, looking excited to try something? And then we also want them to be able to grab for objects and purposefully bring that object to their mouth. So there's just some of the motor skills that we're looking for. So those are the milestones we're looking for. Things that are not a sign that our child is necessarily ready to start solids. They do not have to have teeth to start solids. Their sleep has no impact on, if they're sleeping well or they're sleeping poorly. That's not a sign to start solids. Again, we're looking for those developmental milestones. If our child seems hungry, again, not necessarily a reason to start solid foods. We want those milestones, and our baby's weight status, whether we think they're too small or too big, their weight status, again, isn't a reason to start solid foods necessarily. And I do want to have a caveat here that for infants who are continuing to require medical support post-hospital discharge, such as infants that have oxygen therapy or are continuing to receive tube feeds, those infants may need specific recommendations from their healthcare team about support or when to start solids or complementary feeding. Similarly, children who may have some physical challenges or gross motor challenges regarding sitting independently. Again, chat with your healthcare team about what you're looking for your child individually. But these are typically the milestones we're looking for. And why we want our child to sit independently is that it helps keep the child's airway open and reduces the risk of choking. If we start solids too early, we run the risk of increasing choking hazards because the child isn't sitting independently. They may not have good head and neck control. There's also an increased risk of allergy, and there's added stress. So if our child's not ready and we're serving foods, there's the potential that we will feel extra stressed, and that stress may impact our child. And so we want to keep things relatively low stress, and starting when our children are developmentally ready helps with that. Waiting too long to start solid foods also can put our child at risk. There can be an increased risk of oral aversions, difficulty progressing with textures. There's also increased risk for allergy if we start too late. And again, those stressful feeding interactions. So really in and around 6 months corrected age is when we're looking to start solids. So we know the age at when to start solids approximately, but how do we go about it? As we feed our young children, there's something I like to focus on called the division of responsibility in feeding. And this gives us really clear roles about what, as a parent or caregiver, we're in charge of and what our child is in charge of. And this can really help reduce stress when we remember what our role is. So as parents and caregivers, we are responsible for where our child eats, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. We're responsible for what they eat, so what we serve, what family foods we want to introduce them to, flavors, cultural foods, things like that, and when the food's served. So what does that feeding schedule look like for your family? Our child, on the other hand, is responsible for whether they eat and how much they eat from what's served. So as parents and caregivers, it's not our responsibility to get our child to eat. We're just responsible for setting them where we want to eat and offering foods at a regular schedule for them. Our child decides whether and how much they eat of that food. And remember, as we're starting solids, human milk feeds or formula continue to meet most of the child's nutritional needs. So as we're first starting out, your child probably won't eat very much, and that's normal and that's okay. So where to eat? Ideally, we want children sitting in a high chair. A properly positioned high chair can help reduce the risk of choking because our child's airway is protected and they're sitting upright. And if they're comfortable in their high chair, it also increases the time the child is willing to sit for a meal. Now, in and around 6 months corrected age, under a year corrected age, babies have very short attention spans. So I'm not saying they're going to be in these chairs for extended periods of time, but for 10, 15 minutes, if they're comfortable, they're more likely to stay in that chair without lots of fussing. So when we think about proper positioning, I've got some pictures here to help us think through this. So what we're looking for is our child sitting completely straight with their shoulders in line with their hips. And so you can see this little guy here in the high chair at the bottom is demonstrating how we want a child to sit. His knees are bent at a 90 degree, and you can see with his feet there, he has the ability to bear weight onto his feet and lean forward if he wants to grab something on his tray. He can easily reach food on the tray. And you may or may not see in this picture here, he's harnessed in. And so we do want to use the harnesses on our high chairs to minimize risk of falling from the chair. The picture on the top here, we have a little guy who's leaning quite far back in his high chair. And so you can see here that he's not sitting up straight. And the risk here is that his airway isn't protected. And if he ends up pocketing any food, or if he's overstuffing his food with his mouth with food, there's a risk of choking there. So we're aiming for our child to sit up nice and straight. And so you can see the forward view and the side view of that high chair positioning. Okay, so we've talked about where we want our child sitting. Now I'm just going to go back one slide. If your high chair is like one of these at the top here where the child sits a little bit farther, like leaned back, there are some things you can do to modify it to make it a safer seat. And so what I suggest doing is taking a towel and rolling it up in a tube and sitting it behind your child to lift them up and bring their shoulders back. So you can modify the high chairs. If your high chair doesn't come with a foot plate like the one at the bottom, there are ways to modify the chairs such that you can put one on. There are things you can buy. For example, if you were to buy the very popular IKEA high chair, online you can get a foot plate that you install so that your child has a little bit more extra support to sit up. Okay, so let's now chat about first foods. Introducing those first foods is really exciting. And so we're looking for three main things as we think about a balanced little plate for our babies. So we're looking for healthy fats, things like avocado, nut butters, fish and shellfish, lean meats, flax, and yogurts. And these healthy fats will help support our baby's brain development and their growth. Fat is really important for young babies because they're growing so fast. We're also focusing on iron-rich foods, so things like eggs, meat, beans and legumes, tofu, and nut butters, and our fortified infant cereals are great examples of iron-rich foods. Our babies who are born preterm do have lower iron stores than babies who are born at term. And our preterm babies are at higher risk of iron deficiency and anemia. We need iron to help make red blood cells and to carry oxygen in and around the body. So iron is really key for our little ones. It also plays a role in immunity and brain development and growth. So what we know is that iron stores that the baby gets in utero last until about 6 months. So it's important to focus on those iron-rich foods when we start these solids. And then we're also looking for produce. So introducing fruits and veggies to help with our iron absorption and to provide lots of nutrients and provide fiber. Okay, so we've talked about whole foods to start, but for our preterm babies, there are 2 key supplements that we'll want to continue taking. So if your infant has been prescribed an iron supplement, you will continue taking that iron supplement as you've discussed with your care provider. The amount that you're prescribed is based on your baby's birth weight, and the duration for which you take that iron supplement is also based on your baby's birth weight. And we'll also continue taking that vitamin D supplement, which would be prescribed between 400 and 1,000 international units a day. In terms of other supplements, others like a multivitamin, for example, is not routinely recommended. Your care provider, based on your child's nutritional needs, may have recommended one, but not routinely needed as we start solid foods, because again, human milk or formula, whatever your child is receiving, continues to provide the majority of our nutritional needs as our babies start solids. If you are a lactating parent and you're providing human milk for your baby, continue to take your prenatal or multivitamin supplement to help make sure the nutrients are coming into that human milk for your little one. Okay, so there are a few key foods we want to avoid. Generally speaking, our little ones, the goal is to get them eating all of our family and cultural foods by 12 months corrected age. But there are some foods we want to avoid. So the first are added sugars and salt. We want to avoid these until about 2 years of age. We'll limit them as much as possible. I suggest keeping small portions of family foods aside before seasoning so that you can offer them to your baby without any of the salt or added sugars on them. The reasoning is our babies' taste buds are developing and their preferences are developing, and they're, in terms of salt, their cardiovascular systems are still developing, so we just don't need those added sugars or salt. Honey is another food to avoid until 1 year of age, corrected age, to avoid the risk of botulism. So this includes honey from all sources, cooked honey, raw honey, pasteurized or unpasteurized honey, honey and baked goods, and store-bought products to avoid that risk of botulism. And then we also want to avoid other foods that are at high risk of foodborne illnesses. It's unclear in what age to avoid these two, but as our babies' immune systems are developing, it's best to avoid these foods. So unpasteurized dairy products and juices, raw eggs or runny yolks, raw or undercooked meats and fish, deli meats, and sprouts or pre-washed lettuce are foods that are at higher risk of foodborne illness, so best to avoid. Okay, we are moving through quite quickly, so if you have questions at the end, I'm of course happy to go back and chat. So we've talked about what foods what types of foods to offer, foods to avoid, but what about how to offer? So in terms of texture progression, there are two main ways that infants are often introduced solid foods. So the first is starting with traditional purees. So all of our food is pureed, and then we progress through textures as our child becomes used to check the different texture and gets practice swallowing those textures. Or there's baby-led weaning, which has increased in popularity, I would say, over the past several years. And this is where infants self-feed and no purees are offered. So you start right with whole pieces of food, of course, cut appropriately for the child's developmental stage to reduce that risk of choking. But often what parents do and what I see in practice is a little bit of mix of both. So you can offer some purees and some textured foods depending on what your family's eating and what you and your child are comfortable with at the time that you're starting solids. You can typically progress through textures fairly quickly as you and your child are getting used to them. So you may start here with these pictures with a puree and then something that's minced. Then you'd move to soft cooked pieces and then a whole piece of the item. With baby-led weaning, you would start right with the whole piece. And that works for some babies and not for others. So it's really just figuring out what works best for your child. If you are doing traditional purees, it can be it can be helpful to offer soft finger foods so that your child does have some practice self-feeding. Or what can be helpful is to take the spoon, load it up with the puree, and then hand it to your child so that they can practice putting the spoon to their mouth and what that feels like and how to do that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about introducing allergens. So there are some common allergens: eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, dairy, wheat, sesame, shellfish, and soy are our most common allergen foods here in Canada. In terms of introducing our allergens, there are some recommendations for children who have an immediate family member with an allergy, and then recommendations for children with no family history of the allergy. So more recent research suggests that for children who have an immediate family member with that food allergy, starting to introduce that food between 4 to 6 months corrected age can help reduce the risk of that allergen. Now, certainly discuss this with your healthcare provider, typically or particularly if you're starting to introduce that food closer to 4 months corrected age, because your child may not quite be developmentally ready for solids. So talking about how to introduce small pieces of that, whether it's putting it on their lips, of that allergen food. But the recommendations are slightly earlier for those children with an immediate family member with a history of the allergy. If there's no family history of the allergy, we recommend introducing those foods as you start solids at 6 months corrected age. We don't recommend waiting longer than 6 months corrected age because there is an increased risk of having the allergy, an allergy to that food if you wait too long. So old recommendations used to suggest that we waited until after 12 months corrected age to introduce any allergens. But what we found from that research is that more children were having allergies. So introducing early is recommended. When we're introducing these allergen foods, we want to start with a small amount of the food. Wait a few minutes, see if there's a reaction. If there isn't, you can introduce a little bit more. Most allergies will show up immediately or within 2 hours of ingestion. So just keep an eye out for that. When you're introducing allergen foods, only introduce one at a time. And you'll want to wait a few days between introducing different allergens just to be sure that if there is a reaction, you know which food the child reacted to. If your child reacts, certainly get in contact with your healthcare provider as soon as possible. If the allergy is ruled out and there are no allergic symptoms, you want to continue to offer those allergen foods regularly. I also suggest offering allergen foods early in the day so that you have the opportunity to observe your child throughout the day. We want to avoid offering allergen foods, for example, at dinner time, because then baby's going right to bed, and we wouldn't want them in bed for the night and to have a reaction. Okay. What about water and other beverages? So at 6 months corrected age, if the child is growing well, water can be offered from an open cup. But you do want to discuss this with your healthcare provider based on your own child's situation. Human milk and formula continue to meet your child's hydration needs. So water is optional before 12 months corrected age. When infants less than 6 months corrected age consume water, it does displace the human milk and formula that they're getting and can put them at risk of electrolyte imbalances and inadequate intake of calories because water doesn't have any calories and fills up their tummy. So don't introduce water before 6 months corrected age. At 6 months corrected age, chat with your healthcare team. We don't want to offer cow's milk or any other fortified plant-based proteins like a soy milk until after 12 months corrected age. Again, that's because these aren't nutritionally balanced for our preterm infants. So again, we still want human milk or formula before 12 months corrected age. And there's also no need to offer juice or other beverages before 12 months corrected age. These beverages, again, don't contain a lot of calories and would fill baby, they could have lots of calories, but they don't necessarily contain all of the nutrients that baby needs, and it would fill them up. Remember, their tummies are quite small. So if you are offering water, these are some recommendations here with pictures at the bottom of the slide. Again, these are recommendations. So if your healthcare provider says otherwise, certainly listen to your team. But between 6 and 9 months, we're not offering any more than 4 ounces of water. Between 9 to 12 months corrected age, we're not offering more than 8 ounces or 1 cup of water. But once our babies are 12 to 24 months, their hydration needs do increase, and our minimum intake of water would be 8 ounces or 1 cup, and we're aiming between 1 to 4 cups of water a day after 12 months corrected age. Okay, so let's talk about the when to eat and that feeding schedule. So I've put a little chart here about the number of meals that will progress and increase as your little one ages. So when we start solid foods at 6 months corrected age, we're offering 1 meal. Around 7 months, that might increase to 2 meals. The goal is by 12 months corrected age that your baby is following the same meal and snack schedule as the family and eats the same foods as the parent or caregiver. There's usually no need to change the human milk or formula feeding schedule. Adding solids will naturally decrease the amount of milk that your baby takes in. And in terms of the feeding schedule and what to serve, there's no need to offer just one food at a time, except for those allergen foods. Allergen foods, we're going to offer one at a time, wait a few days, and then introduce the next allergen. But for foods that aren't at risk, aren't high risk of allergies, you can offer multiple foods at a time. Or at breakfast, you can offer a new food. And if you're offering a second meal at lunch, you can offer a second new food. There's no need to wait. Old recommendations were that you should offer one food, wait a few days, and then offer the next. But the challenge with that is then it takes quite a long time for children to be exposed to different foods and textures. And with our preterm babies, we may increase the risk of oral aversions if we're waiting too long to progress through textures or to offer even the experience of different textures or foods. So no need to wait one food at a time, except for those allergen foods. And in terms of portions, there's no such thing as a normal portion. I always suggest to, limit waste is to start with a small amount. Babies have tiny tummies. And if baby wants more, you can offer more if you have it. You've already decided on what foods to offer. So it's baby's role to decide the quantity that they eat. And again, remember that our human milk or formula are providing most of our nutrition still when we start solid foods. And it can be helpful, I think, at least I find this helpful. Babies and even young children, preschoolers, their appetites are quite erratic. Some days they eat tons, some days they don't. And so it's more helpful to look at what your child eats over the span of a week versus individual meals or individual days. So over the week, were they eating and exposed to different foods, different textures, different food groups? Great. One meal, if they only eat a certain food or don't eat any food, that's okay. Okay, so let's chat about navigating some of those challenges. It can take 15 to 20 times for a child to be exposed to a new food before even trying it. So when I say exposure, it means them seeing the food, maybe it's on their tray, but they may not touch it, lick it, or taste it. So just know that it can take time. Also, embrace the mess. This is a picture of my little guy, very much enjoying his blueberry oats. It is absolutely everywhere. And that's, of course, normal because our children are developing their gross motor and fine motor skills. But it's also really developmentally appropriate and helps with sensory development for children to feel the food in between their fingers and all over their face. And, my son's wearing a full tarp there, but if, on their arms, if they're wearing a different type of bib, that's important. So try to embrace the mess. Cleaning it up isn't always so fun, but just remind yourself that it's great for your baby's development to get messy. If cleanup is a challenge for your little one, I suggest bringing a little dish of water with a cloth right to the table so you don't have to, it's not a big ordeal and lots of distraction getting them out of the chair and getting them washed, and just gently dab off their face at the end of the meal. Okay, another thing top of mind as we start solids is the difference between gagging and choking. And I know this can be a big concern for caregivers as they're starting solid foods. So I just want to chat about the difference. So gagging is normal and it's healthy as children learn to eat. So it's a defense mechanism to make sure that food doesn't accidentally get down the wrong tube. It protects the child's airway and it's loud. When a baby's gagging, you will hear it, you'll know. But the baby is in control of that gagging. And so it's important to avoid sticking your fingers in the baby's mouth. If your baby's gagging, just encourage them to cough and demonstrate how to spit out the food. So just let them do their thing. This reflex does disappear with age. However, if, after a year corrected age or around a year corrected age, if your baby is still gagging on all different types of textures and at every meal and snack, that's an indication to seek more help. But just know at the start, gagging is very normal. It happens a lot. Choking, on the other hand, is life-threatening. When a child is choking, their airway is blocked. The baby can't breathe and there's no noise. So this is why we always suggest sitting with baby and watching them eat. Because if you're up and moving around in a different room when baby's eating, you wouldn't know if they were choking. If a baby's choking, unclip them from their high chair and proceed with CPR. Similar to gagging, you're going to avoid sticking your fingers in the baby's mouth, as there's the risk that you might push the food farther back as they're trying to expel it. Okay, so another common challenge is overstuffing. And this is where baby takes, they might take a handful of the food, they shove it all in their mouth, and their cheeks get quite big. And it affects their ability to chew and swallow. This is common, and it's a stage that most babies go through. It's because they're still learning the limits of their mouth and how much food is too much. They might be very enthusiastic about the flavors, which is great. So they're just trying to pack it in. But overstuffing helps baby create a map of their mouths to understand where the back of their mouth is, where their cheeks are, and what is a safe amount to swallow. So if your baby is overstuffing, stay calm, which can be hard, but stay calm and talk to your baby. Coach them to spit it out. You can, either lean them forward a little bit or show them to lean forward to use gravity to help get the food out. Don't try and remove it because, again, if there's so much in there, there is the risk that you'd push something back and it could cause choking. Eat with your baby so they can watch you eat and you can model how much food is the appropriate amount to put in. You can model that chewing and swallowing. And as your baby's oral motor skills develop at between 9 to 12 months, you can offer bigger pieces of food to your baby and teach them how to take smaller bites versus shoving the whole big piece in their mouth. If you've tried these strategies for overstuffing for more than a month or so, and you're not seeing any progress, and baby's continuing to overstuff at every meal with all different types of food, that might be an indication just to seek help from your care provider to see if that's normal for your baby. Another common challenge is pocketing food, and this is where the child holds food in their mouth for an extended period of time without swallowing. It's often because babies are lacking the sensory awareness or tongue coordination, and they don't quite feel confident to safely swallow. So tips, watch your baby closely when they're eating. Again, eat with them. Demonstrate swallowing and spitting food out. Offer a drink from an open cup. And I say open cup because if we drink from an open cup, the water enters the mouth at the front and it can clear food from all areas. If we offer water from a straw, water enters at the back of the mouth and you can miss food at the front. And babies will typically pocket in their cheeks and at the front of their mouth. If these strategies don't work, you can do a very careful finger sweep, but again, knowing go up the side of the mouth and in and around back, being very, very careful not to push food back. Helping baby build sensory awareness with large pieces, for example, a mango pit with all of the fruit cut off, that the mango pits are quite large. They can gnaw on that and it can help strengthen and wake up their muscles. You also want to offer soft and well-cooked foods and avoid dry foods. Dry foods are a very common pocketing. Babies tend to pocket those foods quite a bit. Another question I often get is, what about babies with reflux or GERD, or gastroesophageal reflux disease? So there's no evidence that starting solids earlier helps resolve or treat reflux, and some foods may make the reflux worse. So we're again going to wait for the child to be 6 months, approximately corrected age when they're developmentally ready. The idea is that, if we started solid foods earlier, maybe it's because it would help because those foods are thicker than human milk and might help keep the reflux down. But the reality is, as our babies are starting solid foods, they're being exposed to new textures and tastes, and they're not actually eating a huge quantity of it. And therefore, they're still getting most of their nutrition from the human milk or formula. So they're not eating enough that it would help reduce the reflux. So just wait for your child to be developmentally ready. And then oral aversion. This can be a common challenge in our preterm babies for a number of reasons. Potentially tube feeding, oxygen support, many necessary interventions in and around their mouths. And so some tips, wait until your baby's developmentally ready, let your baby watch you eat regularly, Avoid changing your feeding schedule to make sure that baby's hungry. And I say that because baby's primary nutrition as they're starting solids should still come from human milk or formula. And an overly hungry baby is not primed to learn. Babies who are too hungry and don't yet have the skills to self-feed will likely end up melting down at the table. So make sure they're not overly hungry when you're bringing them to start solid foods. After 9 months of age, if your baby's growing well, you can change that schedule slightly such that you feed them solids first and then the human milk after or formula after. Larger pieces, similar to what we were talking about with food pocketing, they're easier to manage in and around the mouth, so can help increase the child's confidence. Outside of mealtime, sensory play, touching and playing with lots of different textures on their hands, their arms, cheeks if they're comfortable, can help. And keeping a relaxed mealtime environment, avoiding pressures to eat, and just letting your child explore and touch the food if they're comfortable. And with that relaxed mealtime environment, limiting screens and distractions can also be helpful. And start slow. First, just tolerating foods on a tray may be a huge win, and that's great. We then might encourage touching, maybe licking, then tasting, and then swallowing. Eating is a developmental learning process, and eating and swallowing the food is the outcome. So there's lots of different steps. As I said, picking up the food, smelling it, touching it to your lips, licking it, that come before swallowing. So start slow and seek help early. If you know that your child has an oral aversion, or you're thinking that that's something that you're having challenges with, chat with your care providers and seek help from an interdisciplinary team sooner rather than later. Okay, so with that in mind, where to go for help for any of these challenges or questions as you're starting solid foods with your preterm baby. A dietitian is a great resource. They can help you understand nutrient needs and eating behaviors to help support your child's healthy growth and development. Occupational therapists can help with self-feeding and oral motor development and sensory play. Our speech language pathologists, maybe your baby needs a swallowing assessment if you're seeing challenges with swallowing and extended gag reflexes. They can also help with early language development. We know that early language development and eating development are related because they use the same muscles in the mouth. So an SLP can be quite helpful. Particularly for our babies and our kiddos with oral aversions, a behavioral analyst can be really helpful. They evaluate the environmental factors to support positive meal times and strategies to help reinforce desired behaviors like taking bites or later on down the road using utensils. And our gastroenterologists may be helpful in assessing physiological anomalies that may be causing or contributing to eating challenges. And here on this slide are lots of different resources in terms of starting solids and where to go to for extra help. I think these have been linked in today's talk notes, but certainly your NICU follow-up clinic is a great resource. There are specific feeding clinics in the GTA at Sick Kids and Holland Bloorview and North York. Alberta Health Sciences has pediatric eating and swallowing support. And then there's some online resources and practitioners that I've listed here. Feeding Plus and Developing Hands, our pediatric feeding therapy folks. And then there's two websites and apps developed by dietitians and occupational therapists and pediatricians. The Solid Starts app is really helpful in terms of knowing how to safely cut and serve first foods based on your child's development. And they've got an extensive catalog of pictures. And Feeding Littles has general advice for starting solids. So I want to end today's talk. I know we've talked about a lot of different things, but with 3 tips for positive meal times. The first is to limit screens. This allows your family to connect and you to connect with your baby as they're eating, and it helps children listen to their body's hunger and fullness cues. They're not distracted when they're eating. And particularly as our babies are practicing those new skills of eating, we don't want them to be distracted. Eat together. That's important for safety in terms of reducing choking hazards, but family meals have many benefits for children's well-being. It also, eating together allows children to learn your family food rules and your culture and traditions. One tip about eating together is sit your child in their chair when the mealtime starts. So when you're actually ready to give them food, because their attention spans are short. So keep them happy, put them in the chair when the food's ready. And then my third tip is listening to baby's cues. It can be hard, but trust your child's hunger and fullness cues. Research suggests that even our babies who are born preterm are born with the ability to tell when they're hungry and full. So listen to those cues and avoid pressuring your child to eat and using food rewards. And as we end today's presentation, I just want to share some research that my team is currently conducting. We're looking to understand the nutrition and feeding supports that are provided through Canadian neonatal follow-up care. So we're looking to hear from you. So we're looking for parents or caregivers of an infant or child who was born less than 37 weeks gestation and who either currently attends or has attended a neonatal follow-up clinic in Canada. And we're hoping to learn about your experiences and your hopes and wants for nutrition support in follow-up clinic. And with your help, we're hoping to improve those supports. So I think the link to our survey will be shared in today's notes, or you can take a picture and scan that QR code there. And with that, I just want to thank you so much for listening today and for having me join Preemie Chats. My contact information is there. I'm very happy to connect with you via email or Twitter, or I guess X. And I welcome any questions that you might have.
Hi, Kathryn. Thank you so much for your chats today. So much great information for families. They always come and ask us about introducing solids to their babies. You address all the main concerns that parents have. It was amazing. So questions for you regarding adding spices on the food. You mentioned no salt or sugar. How about spices, olive oil, and things like parsley, coriander, garlic, cumin?
Great question. So as we chatted about, the ones we want to avoid are added sugars and salt. Other flavors that you add to your family foods are absolutely welcome. So certainly add, coriander if you want, cumin, any of those spices that you would add to your foods. Research suggests that when we expose our children to many different flavors, it can help reduce picky eating down the road. So help them explore, and you can add cinnamon to their infant cereal and just spice things up a little, and it can help for kids that are pocketing food as well. So certainly add those spices as you would like. Some children may not like spicier foods, so you may just want just as their taste buds are developing and their taste buds are fresh. As we get older, some of our taste buds they aren't as woken up as a baby's taste buds. So just keep that in mind. And sometimes smokier flavors or spicier flavors babies don't like them as much, but it doesn't mean they can't be exposed to them.
Absolutely. So here we have one more question from Lily. Could you please explain again why it's better to introduce allergens at 6 months corrected age instead of 12 months? And also how many days is best to wait between introducing new allergens? Thank you for joining us, Lily.
Thanks so much for that question, Lily. So absolutely. So old research used to say that we would introduce, it was recommended to introduce allergens at 12 months of age. But what we saw is that particularly around peanut allergies. There was a huge increase in peanut allergies among infants. And so researchers in the United Kingdom were really interested in this. And so they looked into it. And what they found is that in countries and cultures where children were introduced to peanuts earlier as part of cultural foods, those countries had much lower rates of peanut allergies versus in the United Kingdom, in places like Canada, where our recommendations were to wait at 12 months of age. So they ran this really beautiful study looking at randomizing babies who are at high risk of peanut allergies to starting earlier at 6 months or later. And what they found is that the babies who started earlier had lower incidence of the allergies. And so that's why we now recommend 6 months corrected age for children who are not at high risk of allergies, meaning they don't have a family history of that food allergy. There's been newer research to even suggest that babies who have a family history of that allergy starting around 4 months corrected age can actually see reduced incidence of allergies.
That is very interesting. So for the babies who show a reaction, what is the next step for the parents? So they go to a pediatrician to do allergy tests right away, or try to reintroduce the food later on? What is the protocol?
Yeah, so the protocol is if you see your baby having a reaction, don't offer that food again right away. Chat with your healthcare provider about, what the reaction was, what the food was, and your care provider will set out the next steps depending on the situation for your child. Typically, that involves having an allergen test and then going from there for recommendations. Many allergies, but not all, many childhood allergies children do grow out of. So it's about meeting with your allergist regularly with those appointment schedules and looking at what's appropriate for your child. Sometimes children go through steps of reintroduction of those foods when they're a little bit older, but it depends on the allergy and what your child's reaction was to it.
Okay, so let's talk about, okay,
Oh,
sorry.
there was one other question about how many days to wait, I think, between the allergens. 2 to 3 days is plenty. If your child was going to have a reaction, it's typically going to be immediate or within 2-ish hours. But just to be safe, we do recommend waiting 2 to 3 days and then introducing a different allergen food.
Okay, thank you. So let's talk about the reality of our lives as a new parent in the house, bringing this baby home from the ICU, lack of sleep, many challenges, many appointments, and now we have to introduce solids to our babies, homemade food versus what we can buy ready to go. And if you make homemade larger batches, can we freeze and still get the same nutrients?
Great questions. So do what works best for your family. So if you have time to make homemade food, that's absolutely wonderful. If you don't have the time, or some weeks you don't have the time, prepared baby foods absolutely exist for a reason. And so reading the nutrition labels on those prepared foods, that would be my one recommendation, just to make sure they don't have extra added sugars or salt in those foods. So read the labels, but those foods certainly serve a purpose and can be really helpful when life just gets crazy. If you're offering those pouches, they're very common right now. They've got a little thing and the kid can suck right from them. I don't actually suggest having the child eat right from the pouch. The reason being is it doesn't allow our child to develop those oral motor skills. So what I suggest is taking that pouch, squeezing it into a bowl, and then using a spoon so that our child is still developing the oral motor skills of bringing a spoon to our mouth and using our tongue to take food off the spoon and move it around the mouth. If we're taking it right from the pouch, it's quite thick, and it's similar, although thicker, to taking a human milk or formula, right? All we have to do is swallow. We're not gaining tone in our tongue and our oral muscles. So that's just a caveat on how to serve. If we're doing homemade foods, absolutely cook in batches, save time. You can just freeze in smaller portions. I suggest using like an ice cube tray, which is like, a few tablespoons in each little slot. freeze them in those, and then you can thaw them as you need them to avoid waste. And similarly, frozen foods hold just as good, the nutrients are just as good as foods that are eaten fresh, particularly, if we want to introduce broccoli to our child and we don't want to buy a whole head of broccoli, buy frozen broccoli in the florets. It's flash frozen. It's frozen at its peak nutritional point. So particularly here in Canada, when we can't necessarily get those foods in the winter, those frozen foods are a great option for the nutritional benefit. And so the foods can last in the fridge for, 3 to 4 months and maintain their peak nutritional status.
That is wonderful. It brought me back so many memories because I used to make the food, all these vegetables separate. And then as I progressed, I put them all together with some spices. Because back 12 years ago,
Yeah.
we are recommended to have only butternut squash and then only carrots. And so now I'm happy to hear that we can actually mix those that are not allergens and give them together. But it's so absolutely freezing is the key. So when especially when you don't have time.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about oral aversion, because this is a very common issue with our babies. And my own son had a massive behavior issue with food that was oral aversion, but took us 6 years to get him from puree to real food after countless hours of therapy and sessions with OT and speech and language pathologist. And we finally found a behavior analyst after developing all the muscles in the mouth with the speech. And then the behavior analyst came to our house and she gave some strategies. 2 sessions later, my son was eating a broccoli. I was like, oh my God, we wait 6 years for that. But, he's eating now. He loves steak and sushi and all that. So there is hope for the families who is struggling at the moment. So talk a little bit about this multidisciplinary team to make those assessments and give families real strategies to overcome some of those challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And so first and foremost, if you're struggling and maybe you already know that your child has an oral aversion from their early feeding and getting them to the breast or chest was a challenge, seek help early because feeding can be very stressful, and particularly with our little babies who have a history of not growing well. And then we're trying to introduce solids and it's, not going the way we thought. Seek help early to help reduce stress and support your child. And so the multidisciplinary team is key because when our child's learning to eat, there's lots of different things going on. They have to manage the sensory input of the environment, of the food in and around their mouth, of the taste of the food and the texture of the food. So it's not so surprising that there can be struggles because there is so much going on. So if we meet with a multidisciplinary team, they can each tackle different aspects of where the challenge might be coming from. We want to rule out, is there a swallowing problem? Is there a muscle tone problem in moving the tongue and chewing and the jaw? So then SLP can help with that. Is it primarily very sensory? And so our occupational therapists can help with sensory play and figuring that out. Our dietitians can, of course, help with nutrients. And the behavioral analyst can really help look at what's going on in the environment when the child's eating. What are parent-child interactions and how are the parent and child responding to each other when food's being presented or refused. And they can help provide an outside perspective on that. Because I think as a parent, when you're in it, it's so tricky, and we just want our kids to eat, and we've spent the time preparing this food, and to watch them not eat, it's really tough. And so that multidisciplinary team can look at all of those aspects and then come up with an approach that's individualized for your child. And I think that's key because every baby is different and every family is different, and what works for one family might not work for another. And so finding the tools that work for you. And just like today, the things I've talked about, Some of these things will work for your family and some won't. They're all evidence-based. Try them out and see what works best for you. But certainly seek help early. And that's where that interdisciplinary team is really key.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Walton, thank you so much for joining us here today. It was such a pleasure talking to you, learning from you, and thank you for sharing this important information with our families today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all of you who put questions in. It was a pleasure to chat with you, and best of luck as you start your journeys introducing solid foods to your babies.
Absolutely.
Take
And you
care.
have you back with the results of your research very soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And to all of you watching us today, thank you so much for joining this Preemie chat, and a special thanks to our sponsor, AstraZeneca, who makes sessions like this possible for our community. And just a reminder that if you miss part of today's sessions, head over to CanadianPreemies.org, right here, our website, and to see this episode and all past sessions of the Preemie Chat. We have over 300 live sessions. And you also find many resources and support options available there. And you'll be reminded that CPBF is a charitable organization and depends on support to continue its important work. So consider how you can support CPBF in its mission to empower families of premature babies every step of their journey. Together, we can create a brighter future for all preemies and their families. And we'll see you again next Friday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Stay well.